And today, we are diving into a pretty provocative analysis of the alleged U.S. intervention in Venezuela.
So, our source material just throws us right into the deep end of a geopolitical firestorm. We're talking about a reported U.S. attack on Venezuela and, get this, the capture of its president. I mean, something like that? It doesn't just make headlines, it literally sends shockwaves across the entire globe.
And you know the first place you see a shockwave like that hit? Yep, the financial markets. For anybody who keeps an eye on global commodities, the reaction was immediate and honestly, pretty predictable.
So no surprise here, right? You've got a major oil producer right in the middle of a conflict. Of course, the price of crude is going to skyrocket. And our source points out something huge. Venezuela's economy is something like 90% dependent on oil. So any disruption isn't just a problem, it's a massive, massive blow.
And right on cue, precious metals jumped too. It's classic playbook stuff. When things get chaotic on the world stage, investors run to what they see as safe bets, like gold and silver. This crisis was textbook. At the same time, though, global stock markets definitely got a bad case of the jitters. The source material mentions that analysts were predicting a pretty steep drop right at the opening bell. I mean, you combine soaring oil prices with this level of political chaos. That's basically the perfect storm for investor panic.
All right, Section 1, a geopolitical shockwave. A president captured, a nation in turmoil. Let's really zero in on the main event here, the thing our source focuses on, the alleged capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife by U.S. forces. A move like that, well, it has huge, huge geopolitical consequences.
Okay, so Section 2, the official U.S. story. What reasons were given for the intervention? You have to ask, right? What was the official line for making such a drastic move? Well, the source material lays out the public-facing reasons the U.S. gave for its actions.
So the official case from the U.S. basically paints Maduro as this total rogue leader. And the accusations were serious. We're talking narco-terrorism, rigged elections, running a failed state, a dictatorship, the whole 9 yards. But the source points out something that is just stunningly blunt. Another reason given was to actually take control of the country's oil to pay for the cost of the military operation. Yeah, you heard that right.
And a huge piece of this official story, a real cornerstone of the U.S. case, was this allegation that Maduro himself was the head of a massive drug cartel, the cartel of the Suns, and they were supposedly flooding the U.S. with narcotics.
Now, the source is quick to point out that this didn't just come out of nowhere. A statement from the year before had already labeled the fentanyl crisis a weapon of mass destruction, so the groundwork was kind of already laid, framing this whole thing as a national security threat and, building a public case for what might come next.
And right here, this is where our whole analysis pivots. The source material basically says, okay, hold on a second. Let's look past the official story. It forces us to ask, are those the real reasons? Or was this all just a convenient excuse?
Which brings us to Section 3, a story of oil and power, the source's alternative narrative. Because the analysis we're digging into here suggests the real story isn't about drugs, and it isn't really about democracy. Nope, it's about something that's been shaping global politics for more than 100 years, oil.
And this is where you just have to take a step back and see the scale of what we're talking about. Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven crude oil reserves in the world. Yeah, more than Saudi Arabia. According to the source, if you want to understand this alternative narrative, that one single fact is the key to everything. So to really get the source's claims here, we've got to go back in time a bit to what was basically a corporate feud. It all started back in 2007 when the U.S. oil giant ExxonMobil got kicked out of Venezuela. So what do? They set up shop right next door, in Guyana. But then Venezuela threatens to move its military into a disputed area where, guess what? Exxon found a ton of new oil. Suddenly, this business dispute is on a direct collision course with a full-blown international conflict.
And then the source points to this incredibly powerful connection. A guy named Rex Tillerson. He goes straight from being the CEO of ExxonMobil, the exact company in this fight with Venezuela, to becoming the U.S. Secretary of State. The analysis we're looking at argues that this move put corporate interests right smack in the middle of American foreign policy.
Okay, and check this out. This is a really key piece of evidence that the source presents. In the 5 days just before the intervention, the rest of the market, the S&P 500, was actually going down, but ExxonMobil stock, it was up 3%. So the source asks a pretty pointed question. Did someone on the inside know that the company was about to get some very good news?
And it's not like these were subtle hints either. The warnings were out there, they were public. The source pulls this quote from a U.S. official that basically says an attack on Guyana or ExxonMobil would be a bad day for Venezuela. Think about that. It directly puts a threat against a private company, ExxonMobil, on the same level as a threat that would bring consequences to an entire nation.
But maybe the most powerful claim in the entire source is this. This whole conflict could have been avoided. It alleges that Maduro actually offered a deal before all this went down, a deal that would have handed over significant control of Venezuelan oil, but the deal was rejected. And that leads to a pretty chilling question from this analysis. Why would you take a deal when you think you can take everything?
So while all this is brewing, the source brings in another major player, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. And here's the kicker. It highlights that before the intervention even happened, she was already meeting with big-time U.S. business leaders and financial groups like Barclays and the IMF. What were they talking about? Allegedly, they were planning out the economy of Venezuela after Maduro was gone.
All right, Section 4, Connecting the Dots. Let's look at the source's alleged sequence of events. So how does the source put all these pieces together? Well, it lays out a step-by-step timeline that it argues reveals the real story behind the intervention.
The source basically lays out this alleged 5-step plot. Step 1, a powerful corporate interest, ExxonMobil, feels threatened. Step 2, their allies in politics gain power. Step 3, they create a public excuse, a pretext, in this case, narco-terrorism. Step 4, they orchestrate a military intervention. And Step 5, all the while, a new, friendly government is already being prepped and ready to take over.
Now this is really important. The source uses this data to completely take apart a common argument you might have heard, that this whole thing was about stopping Venezuelan oil from going to China. But look at the facts here. The United States was already Venezuela's #1 customer. So the argument here isn't about where the oil was going, it was about who was controlling the profits from that oil.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The analysis presents a story that is way more complex than what you saw in the headlines. It's this tangled web of corporate anger, powerful political connections, and of course, massive geopolitical strategy.
And that leaves us with the central question posed by this source material. Was this a necessary intervention to take out a dangerous dictator and stop the flood of deadly drugs? Or was it something else entirely? Was it, as this analysis claims, the final move in a long-term corporate game plan to grab control of the planet's largest oil reserves?